And hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday evening, afternoon, whatever you would like to call it. And welcome back to Two Guys in a Bible. I appreciate you being with me and with Daniel Rogers, who, of course, is with me here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. It's good to be back with you, by the way. We've been off for the last couple of weeks, and I appreciate the fact that Alan Morton uh, set up the playback of my debate with um, uh, David Hester, Professor David Hester in Montgomery, Alabama. And by the way, thank you so very, very much for all of the private messages that I have received from many, many of you who listened in. Pardon me, to both parts of that playback, and are appreciative of that. And so, anyways, it's great to be back. Daniel, it's great to be back with you. I hope you had a really, really good turkey day.
We did, and I think the reason why we took 2 weeks off of, recording is so that the Lord would spare me from having to talk about Auburn football.
You may be onto something there.
How was No, but we had a great Thanksgiving. I had a great, turnout at church for what they call our Friendsgiving Day, and just a good, time all around. Oh, by the way, we closed on our house and started moving into that this weekend, so it's been great.
Awesome. Yeah, that's quite an adventure. That is quite a it's quite a step in a young married couple's life to be buying a house and starting on that journey of 30 years of payments.
Yeah, that's that's right. That's right.
Well,
I didn't I never got this, you're supposed well, you don't listen to this rule, I guess, but, you're supposed to retire at what, 60, 62, somewhere around in there?
oh, that's what they claim. Yeah.
And then they say, the average age or, the average lifespan. So basically you're working for 40 years so you can enjoy 15.
Yeah, exactly. That's
That's how this mortgage thing sounds like. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I hope you're blessed to be able to stay where you are if that's what you want to do for that long. Um, I've been living here in Ardmore now since 1986, which is the longest time that I or anyone of my family have ever lived in one venue.
Wow.
My father was a minister. He was also a top rated produce manager who was on permanent, uh, pardon me, uh, on permanent hire by the old, I don't know if you remember these or not, the old Safeway stores. And so when they had a store that was not or did not have a profitable produce section, they would say, okay, Preston's are moving to Kansas. Okay, we'd live there 6 or 8 months until I got the produce department up and running and profitable. Oh, okay, now we're moving you to Oregon, or now we're moving you to California, or now we're moving you here or there. And so uh, in those venues, my father always liked to uh, search out and find a small congregation that did not have and that could not afford a full time minister. And he would approach them and say, would you be interested in me being your preacher for the next 6, 8, 10 months? You don't have to pay me. You don't have to pay me a full time salary. Uh, if you want to pay me something, that would be great. It would be helpful. But here's what I'm offering. And so, as a result of that, my family moved really, really often. And for instance, when I was in the seventh grade, I went to three different schools in the
Wow.
same school year. And pardon me, it was not a happy time, I must say. When you are in the when you're in the seventh grade, you have enough problems with with teenage angst and
Yeah, yeah.
and insecurity and all that kind of stuff that goes along with it. And so now you're moving to three different schools, uh, having to fit in three different venues, try to make friends at three different places. And so, yeah, that's kind of the way my upbringing was as a young man. And so in 1986, I moved down here to Ardmore, and we've been here ever since. And we bought our house down here, and I'll never forget. Of course, my wife handles all of the finances. I couldn't tell you from day to day what we've got or what we don't have. She tells me every once in a while, we really, really, really need to raise some more support, Don. We, or whatever. But pardon me, that's just about the extent of my understanding and knowledge of our finances. And she told me, some few years ago, because we bought a house within about 7 or 8 months of moving to Ardmore. And she told me, hey, just so you know, we're getting ready to pay our house off. And it was like, woohoo! Oh, wow, that's
Wow.
awesome. Because the house payment was rather significant, uh, not compared to what an awful lot of people pay, but for us it was an awful lot of money. And so it was a huge, huge deal when she informed me that our house was paid off. We went out and ate a really, really nice supper at a fancy restaurant to celebrate. And I must say, been celebrating ever since that we don't have a house payment.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, yeah. So, like I said, I hope that you're able to have that kind of stability and longevity if that's what you wish to have there in Alabama. You're going to have to change your football allegiances to Arkansas if you're going to be on this program, but nonetheless, that's doable.
Well, you know, God told Peter in Acts 10 to not call anything that was clean unclean. What He's cleansed, we're supposed to call clean. And I know you root for a bunch of pigs, but I guess
They
I can
have
be your
been
friend
cleansed.
despite that's
They
right.
have been cleansed.
How was your Thanksgiving break, Don?
Oh, we had a really, really enjoyable time. Our son, who doesn't come home to visit very often, he's 38. He's got his own little world, and what have you. But nonetheless, he came down. We spent almost the full day together, and had a really, really enjoyable time. And like I said, that's unusual because um, he normally doesn't just come and sit down and visit and talk and share, but he did, and so it was a great time.
That's good. That's really good. Yeah, we got to see a lot of people we haven't seen in a long, long time. So it was a good weekend. Sounds like for both of us.
Yeah, it really was. I look upon Thanksgiving not only as a time legitimately to give thanks to the Lord for the multitudinous blessings that He has provided for us, and He truly has. My wife and I talk about this so very, very often about how blessed the Lord uh, has granted us to be in so many different ways. I mean, we've been blessed to be extremely, extremely happy for 52 years of marriage. We are blessed to have a ministry that I tell people all the time, and this is kind of interesting, Daniel. I very often have people just ask me, of businesses that I go in frequently. I'll go in, I'll be doing business, I'll be at the counter, and people that that wait on me very often, they'll just stop doing what they're doing. They say, "I've got a question for you." And okay, what? And they say, "Why are you always so happy?" And it provides me an opportunity to tell them, well, first and foremost, I'm a Christian, and that gives me the basis for my entire life because I know who I am. I know what the Lord's done for me, and I'm a minister sharing His word. And I just tell people all the time, I'm one of those few people that is so blessed to be able to do what I absolutely love to do. I mean, I'm at the office 7 days a week. My office, excuse me, my wife swears up down. I'm at the office 10 days a week, but
Yeah, yes.
I mean, I get up around 3 every morning. Yesterday morning, it was 2:30, and I try to go back to sleep. I can't. So I go to the office around 3:30 and I start reading, I start studying, I start writing, and I get on Facebook, and I must confess, that's kind of a downer at times. You know, when you're dealing with so many really, really negative and, to be honest about it, just downright dishonest people who manifest dishonesty and ugliness of spirit. Uh, but I do that for the benefit of those who are auditing the conversations and what have you. But anyway, uh, like I said, I'm at the office 7 days a week, and that is absolutely not a burden. It's what I love doing. And so I just consider myself extremely, extremely blessed in every way. And so I have a tremendous amount to be thankful for.
Oh, yes, that's how it is at this church, they they told me, they said, now we don't keep up with it. We don't follow you around, we don't keep a ledger, but,
Yeah,
we're paying you for 40 hours of work a week, that's just a general guideline,
yeah.
um, and I just started kinda laughing to myself because I don't know if I've hit 40 hours yet. I think I've maybe hit 50 and 60 just about every, if not more.
Yeah.
And I was talking to one of our members and they said, you don't have to do that. You don't have to come in on Fridays. We never had somebody who came in on a Friday that was a minister. And I said, "Oh, look, if I was at home, I'll be doing exactly what I'm doing here."
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, I just I don't look upon what I do as a quote job, and people ask me very, very often. First of all, they ask me, "Are you retired?" And I laugh. I literally laugh, and I said, "No, not hardly." In a lot of ways, I'm working harder than I ever have at any period of time in my life, and that's in my ministry. And so I tell them I'm self-employed. Uh, and by the way, I just tell them, I got the greatest boss a guy could have. So, I mean, what more could I want? Uh, so, yeah, I really, really do. I just thoroughly enjoy what I do. It gives me a certain a great deal of latitude and freedom because I put in a lot of hours, just like you're talking about. I've had before when I've been working for elders. I had one elder. Well, they actually said this to me in a business meeting. We'd like for you to give an account of your hours. How many hours are you putting in? And we want you to keep a logbook. And I told him, I said, no, I'm not going to. I'm sorry, brethren, I'm not going to keep a logbook. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to appoint one of the elders to follow me around. And I said, I was speaking to one of them in particular, and I said, here's what you do. You meet me here at the office in the morning at 4 o'clock. And he was like, do what? 4 o'clock in the morning? You get here at 4 o'clock in the morning? I said, well, yeah, either that or 3:30 or, whatever. And I said, we'll spend time together. And I said, you can sit here while I read and study and write. And I said, then we'll go to the hospitals and then, we go to the nursing homes and if we got any Bible studies, we'll go do them. And I said, that's, I just gave them a rough rundown of just a typical day. And they said, this is what you do every single day. And they said, you're at the office 7 days a week. And I said, and you brethren didn't even know that? Well, no. I said, well, yeah, I'm at the office 7 days a week. But I said, now, I really want one of you to follow me around every single day. And you can just tell what I do and you can come back and make a report. And they were like, no, 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 never mind. Forget we asked.
oh
and
boy.
and that's kind of the way I feel that the way most preachers are. Now, believe you me, I've known some preachers, they basically punch a 40-hour clock and they were done at 40 hours. And I've never been able to fathom that. But nonetheless, to them, it was a job.
Yes, that's right.
It was not a personal ministry. It was not a personal um, working out of their Christianity. And so, punch a time clock. 40 hours. I'm done. I'm gone. If the phone rings, somebody's at the hospital, I'm sorry. I've already put in my 40 hours this week. Yeah, right. So, that I just don't get that concept of a preacher being a 40-hour worker. That to me is not what being a minister is.
Well, if you're like us anyways, you might do that many hours in the office, but what are you doing the rest of the week? You're on the phone with people, talking about the Bible, making phone calls to Dallas, reading books, listening to sermons in your car. I mean, yeah, Laura would get aggravated with me when I would first started studying preterism because I would just be laying there in bed thinking, and I'd
Oh
fall
yeah.
asleep. And then in the middle of the night, I'd jump up and say, I got to go. I got to go. And she's like, where are you going? I was like, I got to go get my Bible. I got to write something down. I just thought of something else. So,
Oh yeah. I'm
yeah,
very familiar
it's,
with that.
it's a 24/7 gig. You never stop. You dream about it.
Yeah.
One time, Don, we were taking this class. Laura and I were at this preaching school, and it was on the life of Christ or something. And our first little test, we had to write an essay on John the Baptist. And Laura was asking me questions while we were going to bed. And I was laying there and she was asking me about John the Baptist. And I started off, in Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 3. And I just started talking. And then from my perspective, I stopped talking for a second and gave it a little bit of thought and then continued on. From her perspective, I fell asleep for about 30 minutes and jumped up and jumped up and finished talking about John the Baptist. And she said, I answered that essay question, hours, 15, 30 minutes ago, whatever.
That's funny. Well, yeah, I can totally relate to that. Especially during the time when I was struggling with my eschatology, I would be settled down, and we slept in a different bedroom here at our house than we do currently, and so I would be laying down, she would be almost asleep, uh, and all of a sudden I would jump up, and it would scare her. It would literally scare her. And she would go, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Well, you know how it is in the middle of the night. If you've got these thoughts running through your head, if you take the time to talk about something else, you're losing the thought
Yes, that's right.
and it will never, ever come back.
No, it's gone forever.
And so she would be, Don, what's wrong? And I'm waving my hand at her, hoping she'll get the message. Don't talk to me. Don't talk to me. And one of the very first times this happened, here I am running around trying to find a pen and a paper at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And she is just fretting and fuming, worried that something horrible is wrong. And finally, I just said, "Shut up!" And went ahead. I managed to grab the pencil and paper, jotted down my thoughts real quick. And of course, by this time she's really angry that at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning I told her to shut up. And
Right.
actually, I don't think I used shut up. I used hush. But anyway, I wrote the thoughts down, and I said, "Okay, okay." And she said, "What in the world was that?" And I explained to her how the process works. I said, "So, babe, look, anytime I jump up in the middle of the night," I said, "number one, from now on, I need a pencil and paper by the bed. I've just got to have that." But I said, when I'm looking around, if I'm looking for pencil and paper, or if I sit up in bed and grab pencil and paper, turn the light on, don't talk to me. Just please don't talk to me, because those thoughts are so fleeting, and chances are they're really good. So I said, just leave me alone until I'm done writing, turn out the light, and then you can say, okay, what was that? So,
Oh
you know,
man.
yeah, that's the life.
There have been times when I would be driving down the road preaching
Oh,
a fake sermon, just talking out loud. And I would make a point and go, "Oh, that was so good." And I would
yeah,
call Laura and say, "Hey, can you write this down real quick?"
absolutely.
And I would tell her something like, just write down phone book audience relevance or something, something, and I'll know what it is. And she's like, what does this mean? No, I got to keep going. I got to keep going. You just write that down.
I'll never
Oh,
forget,
boy.
and then I'll just share this anecdote, and then we'll get into our lesson for this evening. But on one occasion, I was actually headed to a swap meet. I was in a little '92 Mustang GT, wonderful little car, little hot rod, and I mean, I was just buzzing right along, and I was thinking about the terminology of the sufferings of Christ. And 1 Corinthians chapter 11:26, as often as you eat this bread and drink this blood, you do show forth the Lord's death until he comes. And the correlation between the motif and the subject of the sufferings of Christ and that passage of how the Corinthians, in their participation of the Lord's Supper, were manifesting their participation in the sufferings of Christ. And I mean, that's a brief, thought. But I'm buzzing along, and I didn't have a tape recorder with me. Even one of the little digital pocket recorders. I used to carry one of those with me at all times after a while. And so I didn't have anything handy. And so I whipped off to the side of the road real quick, and I realized I was close to a convenience store. I whipped it into the parking lot and jerked the top off of my console. Lo and behold, there was a writing pad and a pen in there. And boy, I sat there for about 30 minutes jotting down my thoughts on that,
Wow.
just from one linkage to another linkage to another linkage to another linkage. And when I got back home, after the swap meet and after all of that, pardon me, I actually developed a series of articles on it. And I think those are published on my website right now. But it was such a fascinating tie in that I had never seen before. So, we just got to make provisions for those flashes, flashes of thought. And I've said this to my wife a million times. It is absolutely incredible the way the brain works. I mean, here I wasn't listening to the radio. I was really focused on the swap meet that I was going to. And all of a sudden, these thoughts on, quote, the sufferings of Christ, unquote, and you do show forth the Lord's death until he come. And the cup which we take, is it not the fellowship, the communion of the blood of Christ, 1 Corinthians 10, 15 and following. So on and on, like that. To my knowledge, I wasn't thinking about any of that consciously, but it's those are thoughts that I had been pondering in previous days, even previous months. And so here was my mind that had been working on these issues subconsciously, obviously. All of a sudden, it just decided to pop up and say, okay, Preston, time to deal with this now. You better pull over.
That's funny.
Yeah, it really is. It's amazing the power of the brain. And, I wish that I had more brain power very, very commonly and very often. But even with that being true, absolutely true, I am amazed from time to time at the power of the human brain, and I'm staggered when I read about child prodigies who, from age of 3, 4, 5, 6, are mathematical geniuses, literally. And so that that reality that we see displayed in geniuses uh, throughout time, it's staggering to think of the human capability if we could learn to tap into. What do they say that the average human uses between 8 to 10% of our brain capacity? Some say even less than that. And so to think about what might be accomplished in the future if we could learn to tap into the power of the brain to 20%, 30%, 40, 50, whatever. Yeah, that's pretty staggering.
You know, if you believe that the world is just going to end any one of these days, why even have that kind of optimism? You know,
Oh, I know.
isn't that one thing that that preterism allows us to do is have just such optimism for the future and just awe at where the gospel of Christ can take us as humanity? I mean, it's staggering when you think of our potential. As humans who are following Jesus, I mean, what can we accomplish in the world? But when you believe that the universe is just going to shut down any one of these days, then you don't really have that much motivation to see what's possible.
I was sharing those exact same thoughts with an individual who sent me an email the other day, um, and was attacking preterism, because saying preterism is a dead end street. Preterism has nothing to offer for the future. Preterism destroys the gospel. And I responded to them. I said, no, let's make this perfectly straight. Let's get this perfectly straight. It is futurism that says that Jesus was a failure, that says Jesus was a liar. It is the futurist who says there's really no sense in trying to improve our world, because after all, evil men and seducers shall get worse and worse before the end. So it's inevitable that this world, our world, is going to get worse and worse and worse until Jesus comes. So I told this individual, they never responded to anything I said, but I said, it is futurism, pure and simple, that holds out nothing for the future. Literally nothing. You serve a failed Messiah. You hold to a book that has been proven to be false according to your view, and you don't believe there's any future for mankind or the world or for society. You think that we are doomed to get worse and worse unless or until the Lord comes and burns everything up. And like I said, they didn't respond. They disappeared from the correspondence. But I am not a sociologist, and I'm not a philosopher. I am not even the greatest what now cogitator. But I'm like you in what you just said there, Daniel. If we can if we can begin to realize the potential uh, for the future in changing people's lives from lives of fear and bondage about what the future may hold. And as I tell people all the time, look, I am not an I'm okay, you're okay, let's all hug and sing kumbaya type of guy. There are real serious problems in this world. But guess what? If we understand that we're going to be around for a while, then we need to embrace the future, and we need to do our very dead level best to be what the Lord said. You are a city set on a hill. You are the salt of the earth. And when the church and when Christians take the viewpoint, there's not one thing that we can do to improve this world, and that we should never be involved in trying to make the world a better place. When we retreat, and for all practical purposes, we retreat into our monasteries, not literally. Okay. I don't mean we go off into the wilderness and find a cave and wall it up after us, literally, physically. But when we as individuals refuse to speak out on the moral issues of the day, on the issues that are right and wrong, then we allow those who are evil and wicked to have their voice. And I've forgotten the name of the philosopher who said, all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to be silent.
Hmm.
And that is absolutely true.
And it is, and it is. I mean, and when you read Revelation 21 and 22, you don't read about this worldwide paradise. You read about a very central, location where people can travel from the northeast and south and the west and enter into the city. And there's still those outside the gate. There's still nations that need healing. There's still kings and peoples that need to come into the city. So it's not just a worldwide utopia that we read about in Revelation 21 and 22. You're
That's right.
exactly right. It's a city that's set on a hill. And as I said at Michael Miano's conference, eschatology is really the new protology, because not only is it a study of an end, but it's also the study of a great beginning, you know.
I didn't. I've never watched the movie all the way through because what parts of it I've seen I didn't care much about. But the movie Noah,
Oh, I didn't watch it.
yeah, like I said, I've watched 10 or 15 minutes of it in snatches, and like I said, some of the things that were said were just they were really off the wall. They were incredible speculation with no merit. But there is a line in the movie Noah when they come out of the ark. Noah's wife, I think it's correct, said, "It's the end of everything." And Noah responds, "It's the end of everything. It's the beginning of everything."
Hmm.
And that is a fantastic line. And so your statement there at Michael's conference was absolutely true. You know, eschatology is not only the end of all things, as Peter expressed it in First Peter chapter 4 and verse 7, but it's all the beginning. It's also the beginning of the new creation of Christ. And I know when I was studying my way through and out of my traditional eschatology, which, as you know, in the churches of Christ says, okay, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, God's going to burn up the earth, period. The earth and the elements that are therein shall be burned up. Uh, and, you know, that's it. That's the end. But that's not the picture of Revelation 21 and 22. And so that was one of the things that just blew my mind when I began to read Revelation 21 and 22 to see, yes, indeed, you have a destruction. You have a destruction of heaven and earth. In fact, in Revelation, you have the destruction of creation spoken of three separate times. Three separate times, which kind of presents a problem for those who believe that the book of Revelation is a chronological, sequential narrative.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, that's a little problematic. But nonetheless, if you believe in the recapitulation nature of the book of Revelation, then you have this depiction of heaven and earth, of creation, told three separate times. And the result of that is to say, the result of the destruction of heaven and earth is the new heaven and the new earth, which, by the way, results in a time, in a condition in which there is no literal physical temple because God and his Son are our dwelling place. This is all about Messianic Temple. And, one of the things that you said a moment ago there, Daniel, really, really resonates with me. It is a concept. You didn't use the term, but it is a concept that I have used in studying with a great many people who really believe, as I did, as you did, that the book of Revelation is about the destruction of everything, and that Revelation 21 and 22 has got to be about heaven, no more earth, blah, blah, blah. And there's a local minister here in Ardmore with whom I studied for 2 years. He was raised in that same kind of environment, although not in the churches of Christ. And he kept asking, well, what about the end? What about the destruction of all things? What about this? What about that? And I said, well, I believe the primary error in what you're saying is the same error that I espoused for years and years and years in my public ministry. But I said, the book of Revelation is not about a universal utopia. And that rocked him back on his heels, literally rocked him back. And he said, what? Because he had gone from the view of believing in sudden destruction of the entire cosmos to believing in a recreated, literal, physical heaven and earth on a universal scale. And I told him, I said, biblical eschatology is not about a recreated universal world with an earthly utopia. And he was literally like, what? What are you saying? I said, look, what Revelation 21 and 22 depicts for us, as well as Isaiah 65, as well as Isaiah 66, as well as the entire thrust of all eschatological prophecy, is that God, through the coming of the Lord, would establish sanctuary. And he literally sat there stunned. And finally he goes, would you repeat that one more time? I said, sure. I said, God never promised to turn the earth into a physical utopia. He promised that at the coming of Christ, the new Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven, he would establish a sanctuary from the world. The world and wickedness and evil and dogs, liars, and those who work abomination are still outside. But inside the city, inside this sanctuary, there is no more sickness, no sorrow, no tears, no death, no curse. And he grabbed hold of that with genuine excitement. And in study after study after study, afterward, we'd be going over a given passage. And he would look up, he would smile, and he would say, sanctuary. Bingo. And I think that's precisely accurate. And we need to see that it is in Christ, not outside. I had a guy contact me over this last week on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And he was, well, Don, do you believe in universal salvation? I said, well, let's define what you mean by universal. I said, the Bible does talk about universal, but it's in regard to nations. Instead of just Israel being the elect chosen people of God, God said the time was coming in which all nations would be saved. But that doesn't mean every man, every single individual of every single nation. We have to understand that the Bible talks in corporate collective terms. And I said, we're not trained to think that way, in American, Western, Occidental type of thinking. And we worked through several things, and I think he finally grasped the concept of corporate identity and the concept of corporate all nations instead of individual salvation for every single person living in every single nation. I
Sure,
had to I had to repeat it, several different times, but I think he finally got it.
sure, like in Romans 11:26, all Israel shall be saved.
Yes,
But right before that, he says in verse 23, and they also, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again.
absolutely.
Those two
Absolutely.
verses are side by side. Paul's not contradicting himself 4 verses later.
No. Yeah, Paul says, "Behold, therefore, the goodness and the severity of God," in that same identical context. Uh,
you,
to those who fail, severity.
I
Uh,
read a book, and I'm sure you read this book as well, that was a commentary on Romans 9 through 11. And I was so disappointed that that verse was skipped, was left out
yep.
intentionally, unintentionally.
Oh,
I
it was
really,
intentional. It was intentional.
yeah, I was looking for verse 23, and I was just so sad that it wasn't in there.
Well, there were an awful lot of verses, in my estimation, that should have been in that commentary, because after all, the book had been waited for 20 years, and we kept being told that when it came out, it's going to be an absolute blockbuster. It's going to be definitive. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. And when I read through the comments on Romans 11, I literally laid the book down in abject disappointment, saying, this is not what I waited for. Uh, I'm not even sure that the fellow who started the book is the one who wrote those comments, but that's another discussion. So, I mean, this whole concept of sanctuary, and to segue into our subject of the Messianic Temple, of this sanctuary is the Father and the Son are our sanctuary. They are our temple. And for the life of me, Daniel, I have never been able to figure out why anyone would be so attracted to and so attached to the concept of a literal physical temple that they would actually depreciate the beauty, the glory, the power, the majesty, and the all sufficiency of the Father and the Son being our sanctuary, being our temple. I have never been able to grasp that. I still do not understand that. And yet, as you well know, in the world that we live in, the dispensational world says, well, yeah, now, yes, it's true that the church is the temple of God now, but we're still waiting for the real messianic temple.
Wow, yeah. And you know what's sad is people who should know better, people who were told, as you and I were told our entire lives, the church is the people, the church is the people. Treat the building like it's some kind of special, sort of sacred place, as if
Yeah.
we're not the temple of God everywhere. We had someone just on our Facebook getting on to us because we put a Christmas tree up in the auditorium, and they said, "Why do you have a Christmas tree in the church?" And one of our members responded, "Well, the church is the people. That's just a building." but this, but
Yeah.
the same concept applies. When you understand that the church is the temple of God, that we abide in the Father and the Son, why would you want anything less than that? Why would you want to restrict that to some geographical location? It doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, and we've gone over that by looking back at Zephaniah and looking at Malachi, of how God predicted that the time was going to come in which any man, all men in any place would be able to worship and offer acceptable sacrifices unto God. And something you touched on there is so ironic. All of my life growing up, I heard lessons. The building is not the church, but as you point out, then they do a double take and say, well, you can't have certain kinds of church gatherings uh, in the church building. You can't have, in other words, you can't have a group of people sitting around and playing dominoes in the church building. And you can't have people sitting around playing cards. Now, look, I'm not talking about playing strip poker here either. So,
You're talking about Rook and Jen Rummy and whatever.
yeah, rook, jibber, spades or whatever. But those very same people who condemn the dispensationalist for placing emphasis and allegiance to a physical temple and condemn them for that turn right around and they say, well, our building. Now, obviously, we're not recommending, suggesting, or justifying any kind of immoral activity in a building that serves as a convenient location for the gathering of the church. That's not the point here in any shape, form, or fashion. But to condemn the dispensationalist for placing such devotion, allegiance to the future rebuilding, as they see it, of a literal physical temple in Jerusalem, that, by the way, all men, all nations have to travel to in order to worship the God. Uh,
And in order to have rain.
and in order to even have rain, okay, so you condemn that, and yet you turn right around and you put such devotion on the brick, the mortar, the wood of a literal physical building, and you say the only thing that can take place in there is worship 2 or 3 times a week. and wait a minute, Wednesday night is no, no, that's not really the worship assembly. That's just a Bible study. So the irony
Yeah.
here and the inconsistency is absolutely amazing.
It is, and you know what's so interesting is you've mentioned the term sanctuary several times. You know the churches of Christ traditionally do not call that room the sanctuary
Oh, that's
for the
absolutely true.
very reasons we've talked about. They call it the auditorium,
Yes,
or you
and
know something similar to that.
and because they reject the Catholic doctrine of the temples, the church buildings of Catholicism or the Reformed movement of later times. But in the medieval times and even before that, growing up into the in the late second, third, fourth, and on centuries, when they actually had church buildings, which of course started late second century, somewhere along in there, what developed there was the auditorium, as we call it today, was a place of sanctuary. If you were fleeing from the authorities, well, guess what? If you could make it to the temple, the Christian temple, the cathedral, and you could reach the priest, you could cry for sanctuary. And the civil authorities had no authority over what went on in that sanctuary. So that abuse of a building down through the centuries actually gave rise to a, a feedback, a kickback, a resistance against it in what we call the Restoration Movement, which came out of the Presbyterianism, came out of a lot of the different Methodist movements and what have you, in which there was that type of sacramentalism, ceremonialism, etc. And so, in speaking out against those places where a building could be used literally as sanctuary, guess what? Okay, now we have our church buildings. Oh no, no, it's not the temple of God. We understand that.
But if you eat in there, you're wrong.
Exactly right,
Yeah,
because it's a holy place. Well, it's
yeah.
no, no, it's not really holy, but it's the church. No, well, no, it's not the church. Well,
But you can't have a kitchen.
that's right,
Yeah.
and so it's really fascinating and it's troubling when you examine the attitudes toward quote church buildings by those who preach and teach, have taught so for many, many generations now about the non importance of buildings. And yet, when you challenge their views on buildings, all of a sudden they're willing to cut you off and to disfellowship you because you profane the building, which, by the way, is not holy, but you profaned it anyway.
You know, and then, and in all of this, they call the church the temple. They call the church the body of Christ, the sanctuary, you know, but when it comes to understanding that, you do not enter into the Messianic temple until the time of resurrection, they fall short on that, and you know, and then condemn you when you try to be consistent on the idea of the tie-in between the Messianic temple and resurrection and everything that goes along with that.
Oh, absolutely. And that goes back to what my father used to call concordance theology. And one of the very first times that he ever used that term, I was like, what do you mean concordance theology? And he said, well, what concordance theology is when you have somebody as well intentioned as they are, okay, and you have to admire them for the study they put in, but it's not a systematic, integrated uh, type of study. But for instance, they'll go and, oh, we'll look up the word temple. And we're going to find all of the words or all of the occurrences in the Bible that use the word temple. And I knew a minister in the Church of Christ. I think he's dead now. His name was Johnny Ramsey. I don't know if you knew him or knew of him or not, but Johnny Ramsey was a walking, talking concordance theology example. what he had done by his own admission. Johnny Ramsey had gotten out his Strong's exhaustive concordance, and he looked up every single passage in which the term kingdom appeared, and he memorized them, memorized every single verse. Now, most of the time it was New Testament verses. He didn't always memorize Old Testament, and you know why? Because after all, we're not under the old, so we don't need to quote the old. So anyway, Johnny was an amazing guy. He was a great guy, by the way. Uh, I studied with him for over 2 hours on one occasion. He came through town, called me up, and said, "I'd like to talk to you about your views on eschatology." I said, "Sure, let's get together." So we went out to one of the local restaurants, and Johnny tried preaching to me at first. And finally, I just told him, I said, "No, let me tell you something, Johnny. You're not going to sit here and preach to me." I said, "If you want to make a point, you make a point, you make an argument, and I'll respond to it." And I said, "Then I will make a point, and I will have you respond to that." But I said, "You're not going to sit here and simply preach to me as if you're the teacher and I'm the student." I said, "I'm very much a student." And I said, "Believe you me," and I was quite emphatic about this. I told him, I said, "Johnny, I did not want to come to where I am. I came kicking and screaming to where I'm at in my studies on eschatology. I knew very good and well what would happen to me by espousing the views that I hold. So I said, make no mistake, if you can sit here and you can correct me, I will love you even more than I do, and I've always respected you. But I said, don't approach me as if I don't know anything. Don't approach me as if I'm this dumb hick. I don't think I use that terminology, but nonetheless, that's kind of the point I was making. I said, let us study as brethren who disagree. And he kind of sat back in his chair and he said, "Well, Don, I didn't mean to come across like that." Look, Johnny was a great guy. He really was. I really, really respected him. And at the end of our study, after he had quoted 14,000, Bible verses, and I had finally said, let's just stop right here. I want you to pick out a verse. And I said, tell me what you think it says. Let's go there. Let's exegete it. Oh, well, okay. I said, look, Johnny, anybody can just quote verses. Anybody can cite verses. But I said, I like the approach of Alexander Campbell. I said, Alexander Campbell said, I would rather spend 2 hours establishing the proper context for a single given verse than I had to quote 200 verses. And of course, Campbell was more than capable of doing that, of quoting 200 verses and never setting the proper context. So I said, here's what you do, Johnny. Pick out a verse that you think refutes what I'm saying, and let's go there. Well, he did that a couple of different times and found himself in some really deep trouble. He could not answer the contextual arguments that I pointed out, the audience relevant issues that I brought up. And finally, at the end of 2 hours, it was probably more like 2.5 hours, but nonetheless, at the end of the period of time, Johnny said, "Well, I've got to say, Don, I really didn't realize how much there was to what you're saying." And he said, I also confess and I want to apologize to you. I thought maybe you had done this in order to make a name for yourself and to get a following. And I just shook my head. I said, Johnny, what what kind of a judgmental attitude is that? He said, look, I apologize. He said, I no longer believe that about you whatsoever. I believe you're absolutely sincere in what you believe. He said, you've raised some good issues here. And he said, I'm going to have to give some thought to some of those things. Now, he said, I'm not saying at all that I believe you or that I accept what you're saying. I said, that's fine. I said, but here's the point, Johnny. For too long in the churches of Christ, we think because we can quote all these verses that we are taking them in their proper context, when the reality is we have completely, totally missed the proper context. And I said, I am doing my dead level best to honor the context. And that's what covenant eschatology and those people that I know the best are so determined to do. And that is to look at the biblical text, dive as deeply into the original audience relevance, into the world of the original audience, what the German scholars call the Setz in Leben, to understand what would that original audience have thought when Jesus or any of the apostles uttered or wrote what they did. Would they have run to Smith's Bible Dictionary to look up a term? That's obviously facetious. But so often in our world today, and I encounter this on Facebook, I know you've encountered this constantly. You encounter people who actually eschew biblical scholarship, they scoff at it. I have had people tell me overtly, explicitly, and vehemently, I don't need to read any scholars. I have the Bible. To which I have responded, well, you do realize that it was Greek scholars who produced that Bible, right? Well, yeah. Okay. Then you're accepting scholarship.
Yeah, I just wrote a little article for our bulletin called "No One Just Reads the Bible."
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, and that's absolutely true. I mean, I grew up believing, teaching the Bible and the Bible alone. Bible's all we need.
But
And
they needed you to stand up every week. Why didn't you just stand up and read scripture?
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Even Ezra and Nehemiah and the return from the Babylonian captivity, what did they do in Nehemiah chapter 6? They stood up and they read the law, Nehemiah chapter 13 as well. They read the law and they gave the meaning thereof.
Hmm.
And so, uh, the Bible was not written, as I said to one individual on Facebook just recently. He was a Church of Christ guy that accosted me and attacked me, and I won't call his name, but I said, listen, you have to understand something. The Bible was not written in a vacuum. It was not written to 21st century Americans. And boy, did I get ripped up for saying that on a YouTube video just the other day. A guy had posted a video saying, "Is America in Bible prophecy?" And went on to say, "Yes, it was." And I wrote underneath in the comment section, "No, America is not in Bible prophecy." And this guy responded to me by saying, "Boy, you need to be schooled." And I wrote back and I said, "I'm more than willing to be schooled. So proceed." He hasn't posted since. So, you know, uh, this whole thing about understanding the Bible relates to our subject of the Messianic Temple. What did the first century authors, when they wrote about the temple, in John chapter 6, which is where we were originally going to go this evening, ladies and gentlemen? Uh, Boy, Daniel just got me sidetracked, something awful. So, anyway, in John chapter 6, so much of what Jesus said and taught in John chapter 6 segues into the concepts of the Messianic temple. And obviously, it segues into what happens in chapter 7 and 8, which is all about the feast days of Israel that pointed forward to, guess what? The Messianic temple pointed toward resurrection. And so, one of the things that Daniel said a moment ago, I said all of that to bring us back to this. Daniel said we have to understand that Messianic temple and resurrection are absolutely interrelated. Those who practice concordance theology, they study temple separately from resurrection, and they fail to see the segue and the conflation between the two of them. And so when we suggest things like, in order to understand Messianic temple, you need to understand resurrection, or to understand resurrection, you need to understand Messianic temple, It's almost like you are speaking not Greek, but you're speaking Assyrian. you know, you're speaking in something totally unheard of. And speaking of being out of time, we are out of time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us here on Two Guys on a Bible and Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. Daniel, great to be with you always. And with that, I'm going to say good night and God bless.